Man, what a surprise, right? Waking up, checking YouTube, and seeing we finally have word on the Switch 2. Just a single announcement that came out of nowhere. So, what's its real name? Huh? That is its real name? Seriously? Just the thing people have been calling it while speculating? Huh. Well, at least it might prevent a Wii U situation where some people are confused and don't get that this is a new console. And since we do have the news, well, let it never be said that I am one to let an opportunity go to waste. Time to engage in rampant speculation and vapid philosophizing like everyone else. I mean, make a good and insightful video about it like everyone else. Yes. Oh, and to my usual viewers, don't worry, this isn't the January video. I've got something else prepped for the end of the month. But for now, let's focus on the news. It kind of feels weird that it's finally official. I mean, we pretty much knew Nintendo would eventually release a new console, but it feels like the length of time people have been speculating about the Switch 2 will be longer than the time between the Switch 2's announcement and release. Because, yeah, it did take a while for us to even get an announcement, much less, the actual console. Even as someone who wasn't in any rush to have a new console, I haven't been truly hyped for a new console from any manufacturer since the Wii. And someone who doesn't care all that much about tech specs. I mean, just look at the number of retro games I gladly cover over anything modern. It does stand out to me that the Switch has gone longer than any other Nintendo console, save for the original Game Boy, without getting any kind of a successor. So maybe it was about time. But I'd say that despite people clamoring for a Switch 2 for so long, there are good reasons for the wait. The big one that stands out to me is the slow growth of the 9th gen consoles. That could be its own video, really. But to put concisely, I'd say there are probably two main factors here. First is the COVID-19 pandemic, which created a lot of issues. While yes, it did help software sales, especially Nintendo's own Animal Crossing New Horizons, since people had a lot more time at home and video game software tends to give you a lot of hours for your money, not to mention a way to still do things with friends online when you can't see them in person. The situation was different for hardware. Global chip shortages led to a shortage of the 9th gen consoles, leading to scalpers driving up the prices and making getting a new console a little less appealing. And at the same time, the pandemic put many people in a tough financial situation, which would of course make it harder to justify spending several $100s on a new game console, especially without some big selling point and when the old consoles were still getting plenty of support for several years. And that then brings me to the other point as to why I think they were kind of slow to catch on: diminishing returns on hardware improvements. While clearly the PS5 is selling well enough that this isn't a universal opinion, look, I just think that each successive console generation is less of an improvement than the last. There's just not as much of a sense that a new generation of games couldn't exist on the older hardware beyond maybe the fact that they'd look a little less fancy. And I feel like this is sort of backed up by how long it's taken for even console exclusives and first-party titles to abandon the 8th gen consoles. But the slow adoption of the 9th gen consoles gives us a couple of things to look at, in addition to how many of the reasons for the said slow adoption are also good reasons to hold off on releasing the Switch 2. For one, and this is conjecture, I would assume the original plan of Nintendo was to wait until the 9th gen consoles had themselves established in a way that, again, just took a while. The Switch launched late into the 8th generation and did very well. I think in large part thanks to the Switch having a sizable market as a secondary console. A console you get, even though you have other ways to play video games, just because of Nintendo's large list of exclusives. So staggering its release compared to the others makes it feel less like it's in direct competition with the other consoles. The question is not, there's a new console generation, which console or consoles should I get, but rather separate questions of, should I get a new PlayStation or Xbox, and then a few years later, should I get a new Nintendo console? Plus, given Nintendo generally tries to make their consoles more affordable and now has this hybrid console niche it created, waiting has a few other advantages. Mostly that it will let technology improve to let them get closer to parity with the other consoles without sacrificing affordability or portability. And secondly, the slow adoption of the 9th gen consoles put a little less pressure on Nintendo, realistically, to move on from the Switch. While yes, its lack of power, relatively speaking, has come around to hurt Switch ports of many games in recent years, it still did get those ports, which is not something I could imagine being the case if they were games made predominantly for PlayStation 5. With the PS4 having such a long lifespan, the Switch simply wouldn't be as far behind the competition as it might have been otherwise. But honestly, I think another big reason is just, well, why wouldn't this give Nintendo cold feet about releasing a new console? Nintendo has experienced far more dramatic swings in its fortunes, generation to generation, than any of its competitors. So if sales are slow for other consoles, what happens if the Switch 2 is one of Nintendo's flop consoles? And either way, why wouldn't Nintendo want to stretch the Switch's lifespan as long as possible if it's profitable for them? Especially since, while people love to complain about the Switch's specs, there's undeniably something good for the consumer in this. At least for people like me who buy Nintendo consoles mostly for Nintendo exclusives. Unless you believe that the Switch's specs are seriously detrimental to the quality of the games, which as a retro games enthusiast I really don't, then it's a pretty sweet deal to be able to go an extra year or two without buying a new Nintendo console in order to continue to play new Nintendo games. But that's all the past. So how about what we know about the Switch 2? Well, it's not a lot. It was really just an announcement trailer, so we mostly just have the physical form of the thing. And it's not that different from the Switch 1. They could have easily released a Switch Pro with all these changes, but then that's kind of normal for companies that aren't Nintendo, and there's still some neat changes here. A larger screen and Joy-Cons are appreciated, and I think the new aesthetic's pretty slick. I particularly like how they preserve the blue and red colors as accent tones, while leaning into the sleek gray design that I preferred on the original Switch. A great compromise between the two launch color options of the Switch 1. More functionally, there's a larger kickstand that I assume will be easier to use, a top-mounted USB-C port that presumably is primarily to make it more convenient to charge while playing in tabletop mode, and a new mechanism for attaching the Joy-Cons, though I do worry slightly about the durability of the system. We'll just have to see. The right Joy-Con also seems to have a new button beneath the home button, which I just assume from the shape is probably a second capture button so you can still take screenshots while playing with a single Joy-Con. But more pragmatically, we learned two things. First, it will be backwards compatible with Switch games, and the Switch Online service will cover both consoles. They do put some caveats on backwards compatibility, but only time will tell what this means, and I don't feel like it's worth making a big deal out of until we know how big of a deal it will be. It could just be that the Switch 2 won't be compatible with some obscure eShop shovelware that nobody cares about, or it could significantly impact the availability of some of the Switch's best games. Though personally, I suspect this could just be them covering their asses so they don't get accused of false advertising over a few very niche things making certain games unplayable. Ring Fit Adventure comes to mind as an example, since it was a very popular Switch game that relies on a peripheral that would not be compatible with Switch 2 due to the change in how the Joy-Cons connect. Also, the Switch 2, as far as we can see from the angles in the trailer, seems to have dropped the infrared sensor in the right Joy-Con
con that you probably forgot about, and that probably affects like 1 or 2 games in 1-2 Switch and nothing else noteworthy. Let me know in the comments below if the infrared sensor was used for anything else. So until we get more news about this backwards compatibility issue, I'm just going to assume it's referring to what I just laid out. Oh, and one more positive, there is a game card slot, presumably both for backwards compatibility and for new Switch 2 games, though the latter wasn't actually mentioned. But it'd be weird if it was just for Switch 1 games. And this is a small thing, but it is important in this day and age when companies such as Sony are trying to slowly move away from physical games. And look, the last physical game I bought was Monster Hunter Rise. I've mostly gotten on board with digital games, even on consoles, especially in the absence of any physical store to support. But anyway, I just think it's nice to have the option for physical games, since I know many players do care about owning physical copies of their games, and it's also just nice when the Switch 2 could probably make a better case for removing physical games, since it's a handheld where every bit of space matters, compared to a PS5 that is going to sit on a media cabinet all the time, and can definitely spare the space for a disk drive. So I think that's kind of it. I mean, look, maybe I missed things, but it's only a brief trailer. We'll have to wait until April 2nd to learn more, but I want to include at least some substance in this video, sandwiched between the philosophy and speculation. So let's get to everyone's favorite part of videos about upcoming stuff. Making claims about 5 things that the Switch 2, quote, needs. Which, you know, it doesn't really need. Well, except maybe the very last one, for reasons that'll be obvious when I get there. But saying things in such absolute terms are just how people put these things on YouTube. But you and I both know that these are just things that I'd like the Switch 2 to have. So the first thing I consider essential, which actually has been confirmed already, is backwards compatibility. The Switch has had such a strong last few years, and it would be a shame to move on from them too quickly. Plus, I think including backwards compatibility should also help ease the transition by allowing a bit of an overlap between the two Switches. Early adopters of the Switch 2 can still benefit from any ongoing support the original gets, and people who don't want to immediately adopt a new console can benefit from a bit more support before the new games dry up entirely. Second, and probably least important, I would like to see it have some interesting hardware gimmick we haven't seen yet, but it's not quite essential. Neat to have, but lightning probably wouldn't strike twice like it did with the Switch's hybrid console concept that genuinely put Nintendo ahead of the game for a bit, and it's far more likely a gimmick becomes something neat that gets used in a few launch games before being basically forgotten. And hey, while the Switch is no longer the only game in town, it is still doing the hybrid console thing. Thirdly, I wanted to focus on affordability over tech specs. Look, I already said I'm not that concerned with specs, and I know some people put a lot of weight into them, but I just think Nintendo has a lot to gain by making it more affordable. Especially when it'll be sharing a market with stuff like the PS5 Pro and its eye-watering price. And this is also keeping in mind that the Switch 2, being this sort of hybrid console, it's probably never going to be the most powerful hardware anyway. This will of course come at a cost. It will not be as great for people who want one single game console in their lives, but it will make the Switch 2 more accessible as a second console for those who already get their gaming needs met elsewhere, like how the Switch 1 could be for some people, myself included. Fourth, better Switch Online. Yes, better connection speed and quality are important, but those are hard to talk about in an interesting way. So in particular, I want to see more consoles added to the game catalog. GameCube, Wii, and DS games especially. There are probably some technical challenges to doing some of these, but look, I just think game preservation is good, and it would be great to have these games be more accessible to more people. But this could supplement the launch lineup nicely, allowing Nintendo to capitalize on the popularity of once-per-console series like Animal Crossing, while still saving a brand new game in that series for a later release.
And maybe these could be used to make the expansion pack worth it, because, yeah, that just isn't worth more than doubling the price in my eyes. Heck, do it right, and these extra retro games might be good enough to qualify as a unique selling point for the Switch 2. And, business stuff aside, I'd really just like if Nintendo made it easier to play more of their old stuff. And I am at least glad that with the Switch Online service carrying over to the Switch 2, it seems like we won't have to restart from nothing with the library of retro games they've made available. Like what happened when moving from the Wii to Wii U or Wii U to Switch. But last and absolutely most importantly, the one thing I consider to be genuinely essential to the Switch 2's success: games. Because there's no point to me in buying a more powerful console if those specs don't enable it to run new games. The Switch 2 will probably be outclassed as a general gaming machine simply due to having to fit this handheld format, and also because of how Nintendo tends to do things and their priorities. So, Nintendo, as a company who relies a lot on their exclusives, does need to make good use of them. They've proven with the original Switch how well this can work, with how its incredible first-year lineup got people's attention and set the stage for a really fantastic run. To dig into this a little more, I think there's 3 pillars that Nintendo needs to hit. First, a wide-appealing, high-selling title like Mario Kart or Animal Crossing that gets the interest of families and the general public. The launch teaser seems to be teasing a new Mario Kart, so that's covered. Second, a big blockbuster title like Breath of the Wild, or to a lesser extent, Mario Odyssey, that can drive discussion and create hype among the core gaming audience. This is harder, ironically, because the last couple of years of the Switch have been so strong and filled with Nintendo's big franchises. So I'd say maybe a new 3D Mario title currently feels like the best shot at fulfilling this pillar and replicating Breath of the Wild's success. And the last and most complicated pillar, and the one that really matters to me and my interest in the Switch personally, the other two are more about what I think will help it succeed and sell. The last pillar is a wide enough range of second-tier exclusives in its first year or so. Stuff that maybe isn't driving mass sales or anything and won't be the biggest game on the console, but that nonetheless are important in many ways. Most relevant to people like me, helping the console reach the point where I go, yeah, there's enough things I want on this console for it to be worth buying. So this last pillar is stuff like Splatoon 2, Xenoblade 2, and Kirby Star Allies were on the Switch. A strong first year helps set expectations that players who buy in early will continue to get a lot of good games throughout the lifespan of the console. It's going to be interesting to see how things unfold. I feel like Nintendo's in a very different place, both economically and in terms of how it's viewed by people, than it was 8 years ago when the Switch released. But I am hopeful. Although I don't consider myself a true Nintendo fan, as it typically manifests in YouTubers, Nintendo does have a special place in my heart. I was a Nintendo kid growing up. I'd have the occasional fling with Sony consoles, and PC is my main platform today, but Nintendo still has always had a particular special place in my heart. And they keep that spot because they continue to lean into exclusives. Maybe not the most pro-consumer thing, but I don't know. It's how things used to be, so I'm not bothered by it. By comparison, I mean, most of the stuff that got me interested in PlayStation consoles, generally third-party stuff like Metal Gear, Devil May Cry, and Armored Core, has all gone multi-platform, including PC releases. Heck, even stuff that remains PlayStation console exclusives, like some of the big Final Fantasy titles, or even God of War, get PC releases these days, so I feel no urgency to get a PS5, even 4 years in, but I will probably get a Switch 2 at some point, even if it's not at launch, just because even if these games are no longer the center of my world like when I was a kid, I still have a lot of Nintendo games that I love, and if I have to get a console just for those, so be it, I guess. Would I be better off if Nintendo started porting their stuff to PC? Yeah, probably. But I'm just not the type of person to say, oh, the other companies are doing X, so why isn't this company doing it? Maybe it comes from growing up with the Wii when Nintendo was very much not doing what the other companies were doing. And maybe this particular topic doesn't bother me because, yeah, exclusives were just the norm back when I was young. And maybe that's why I still like Nintendo. I'm just a lot more patient with the stuff other people tend to be bothered by. But all that said, the Switch is a tough act to follow, and the current video game market feels far more hostile. But I hope the Switch 2 succeeds, because I do like Nintendo. There's a lot you can and should criticize them for, but I think the video game industry is better with Nintendo in it. Because while it's sometimes a bad thing, Nintendo does things differently, and it is often a very, very good thing, providing industry resistance against the trend chasing and homogenization that nearly caused me to lose interest in video games. And plus, as the industry becomes more and more consolidated, with Microsoft and now Sony making massive acquisitions of game studios, well, having one more big competitor is only going to be even more important. So here's to video games, to Nintendo hopefully continuing to do the good stuff and to do less of the bad stuff, to one more good year with the Switch and a strong start to the Switch 2. And hey, because I normally try and end these with some questions, what games do you want to see in the first year of the Switch 2's lifespan? Let me know in the comments below, and for now, this is Mikhail, signing off.